I'm Allison Morris, 27, sitting in my sleek office at TechVision Industries where I've been a hiring manager for 2 years now. Glancing at my schedule, I freeze. Stephanie Morris, 23, Stanford graduate. Impressive resume. My sister. The golden child my parents kicked me out for at 18 to secure her future, and now she's walking through my door, her confident smile dropping as recognition dawns. 5 years of silence shattered in an instant. Before I tell you how this shocking reunion played out, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever dealt with family favoritism or unexpected reunions, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of survival and success after family betrayal. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in the Morris household meant understanding one unspoken rule. Stephanie was special. And I was, well, just Allison. This wasn't something my parents, Richard and Karen Morris, ever stated explicitly. They didn't need to. Their actions spoke volumes. From the earliest days I can remember, Stephanie demonstrated what our parents called exceptional gifts. At 3, she could recite the alphabet backward. At 5, she played simple Mozart pieces on the piano without formal training. By 7, she was doing math 2 grade levels above her peers. Meanwhile, I was hitting all the normal milestones at the normal times, which in the Morris household was somehow disappointing. Stephanie has a natural ear, my mother would gush to her friends during my sister's piano recitals, while I sat in the audience after practicing 4 hours daily to master my piece. When I performed, the compliment was always, "Allison works so hard." The subtext clear. Effort was required where talent was absent. Our birthdays illuminated the disparity. My 16th birthday gift was a used laptop for schoolwork. 2 months later, Stephanie turned 13 and received a brand new MacBook Pro, professional music recording equipment, and a weekend trip to New York to see Broadway shows. When I asked why the difference, my father responded with surprising honesty. Investments should match potential returns. I remember standing on the stage at my high school debate tournament, scanning the audience for my parents after winning the state championship. They had promised to attend, but 2 empty seats confirmed they'd chosen Stephanie's science fair instead, despite her participating every year and my debate success being a first. Later, my mother explained, Stephanie's project on alternative energy could open doors. These things matter for her future. What cut deepest wasn't Stephanie's abilities but my parents' narrative about them. They didn't just praise her accomplishments. They wove them into a mythology of inevitable greatness. "Your sister is destined for something special," my father would say, sometimes not even realizing I was in the room. Some people are just born with that spark. To her credit, Stephanie often seemed uncomfortable with the attention. In private moments between sisters, she'd confide, "I wish they'd stop putting so much pressure on me." But discomfort never evolved into resistance. She accepted her role as the family's shining hope, while I accepted mine as the ordinary daughter whose value was perpetually in question. I tried everything to win their approval. I maintained a 4 gigapascals through advanced placement courses. I captained the debate team, edited the school newspaper, volunteered at the hospital every weekend. My efforts were acknowledged with distracted nods and comments like, "That's nice, Allison. Have you seen what Stephanie did?" The psychological toll was insidious. By 17, I'd developed an internal voice that constantly questioned my worth. Was I working hard enough? Was I achieving enough? Would anything ever be enough? I started seeing a school counselor who recognized the signs of anxiety and depression stemming from what she gently termed challenging family dynamics. "You exist in the shadow of a spotlight," she told me during one session. "But remember, some things grow beautifully in shade that would wither in direct light." I clung to those words during family dinners where my parents would strategize Stephanie's path to greatness while I silently passed the potatoes. I repeated them like a mantra when relatives would ask Stephanie about her achievements while asking me if I was still doing that debate thing. I whispered them to myself on nights when I could hear my parents in Stephanie's room, discussing her brilliant future long after they'd offered me a passing goodnight. What no one realized, perhaps not even me until years later, was that this dynamic wasn't just shaping my self-perception. It was preparing me for the ultimate demonstration of my secondary status in the family hierarchy. The lesson that I was dispensable was coming, and despite years of conditioning, it would still manage to blindside me completely. Our family's financial descent began with a corporate email. Dad came home unusually early one Tuesday when I was 16, his normally perfect posture slumped. Downsizing. Budget cuts. 20 years of loyalty at Meridian Financial reduced to a cardboard box of desk items and a generous severance package that wouldn't last 6 months. Mom's part-time work as a real estate agent had been supplemental income during good times. Now it became our lifeline. The housing market was in a slump, and her commissions grew sparse. I started noticing changes immediately. Generic brands in our pantry, the thermostat set lower, hushed arguments behind closed doors late at night. "We'll need to make adjustments," Dad announced at dinner one night, 3 months into his unemployment. Temporary sacrifices for the greater good. Those sacrifices manifested unevenly. My winter coat was still perfectly good despite frayed cuffs and a broken zipper. But Stephanie needed a new one because first impressions matter for her music competitions. My SAT prep became self-study with library books, while Stephanie's continued with her $200 per hour private tutor because her scores could determine her entire future. The college funds became the focal point of their anxiety. I overheard them one night through the heating vent that connected my bedroom to the kitchen below. "We can't support both of them through college," my father said, voice strained. "Not with things as they are." My mother's reply cut through me like glass. "We need to invest in the child with the most potential. It's just practical, Richard." The silence that followed the absence of my father's defense confirmed what I'd always suspected but hoped wasn't true. I doubled down on my efforts. Senior year became a blur of academic achievement and constant work. I captained our debate team to nationals. I graduated third in my class of 400. I secured a partial scholarship to State University that would cover about half my tuition. Meanwhile, I worked 20 hours weekly at a local coffee shop, saving every penny. When I proudly announced my scholarship at dinner, my father nodded distractedly. "That's nice, Allison," Mom added. "Too bad it's not a full ride," before immediately turning to Stephanie. "Professor Winters called today. He thinks Stephanie should apply for the summer music program at Juilliard. It's expensive, but he says it could position her perfectly for college applications." I sat there, my achievement evaporating in the excitement over Stephanie's opportunity. Later that night, I heard them in the study, calculating costs. "Even with the scholarship, Allison's college expenses would drain us," Dad muttered. "And Stephanie needs these summer programs and the private lessons if she's going to stand out to the top schools." Mom's response was pragmatic. "Allison's smart enough, but she's not exceptional. She'll do fine wherever she goes. Stephanie has once-in-a-generation talent. We can't squander that." I took on a second job at a grocery store on weekends. My grades slipped slightly as I balanced work and school, prompting my parents to question my commitment to excellence while never acknowledging why I was working 60-hour weeks between school and jobs. Meanwhile, Stephanie continued attending her expensive programs. She excelled in everything, earning praise from instructors who used words like prodigy and extraordinary potential. My parents beamed at these assessments. Their conviction reinforced that they were nurturing rare talent that would someday bear magnificent fruit. The breaking point approached with the subtlety of a freight train. I could feel it coming in my parents' increasingly transparent calculations, in the way they discussed Stephanie's needs as essential while framing mine as optional. The tension built through my final semester, through graduation preparations, through the arrival of my modest scholarship and acceptance letter. What I didn't realize was that they weren't just prioritizing Stephanie's education over mine. They were eliminating mine from the equation entirely. My 18th birthday fell 2 weeks after high school graduation. I'd expected little, perhaps a card, maybe a small gift if finances allowed. What I received instead was a family meeting. "We need to discuss your future, Allison," my father began, seated formally at our dining room table. My mother sat beside him, hands folded, expression solemn. Stephanie perched uncomfortably at the far end, eyes fixed on her lap. I still remember the bizarre formality of it all, like a business meeting rather than a birthday conversation. Dad had even prepared notes, which he referred to periodically. "As you know, our financial situation remains challenging," he continued. "Your mother and I have had to make some difficult decisions for the family's long-term benefit." My stomach tightened. I'd seen enough family meetings to recognize when bad news was coming, but nothing prepared me for what followed. "We've calculated the cost of supporting you through college, even with your partial scholarship, and it's simply not feasible without jeopardizing Stephanie's opportunities." Mom jumped in, her tone gentle but her words devastating. "Stephanie has been accepted into several summer intensive programs that will position her perfectly for Ivy League applications. Her instructors all agree she has extraordinary potential." Dad nodded. "Potential that could benefit the entire family someday." I sat in stunned silence, waiting for the actual point. It came with brutal efficiency. "We've made the difficult but necessary decision that you'll need to find your own accommodation starting next week." The words didn't make sense at first. "My own accommodation? You need to move out, Allison," my mother clarified. "You're 18 now, legally an adult. We simply cannot support 2 households and 2 college educations." The implication crystallized with horrifying clarity. They weren't just asking me to take out student loans or work through college. They were cutting me off completely. "You're kicking me out? On my birthday?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "We're acknowledging your adulthood," my father corrected, as if this semantic adjustment changed the reality. "And we're making a strategic decision for the family's future." My mother reached for my hand across the table. I pulled away. "Honey, this isn't personal. Stephanie's gifts are exceptional. The opportunities she has, they don't come twice. If she succeeds the way her mentors believe she will, she'll be able to help all of us." I turned to Stephanie, who had yet to speak. Her eyes were red-rimmed, face pale. "Did you know about this?" She nodded almost imperceptibly. "They told me yesterday," she whispered. "And you said nothing?" Her silence was answer enough. My father intervened. "This isn't Stephanie's decision. It's ours as the parents, and we've considered all angles. The resources we have must be invested where they'll yield the greatest return." "I'm not a stock portfolio," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "I'm your daughter." "Of course you are," my mother soothed. "Which is why we know you're capable of handling this transition. Stephanie is more sensitive. She needs the stability of home during these formative years." The manipulation was almost elegant. My competence and resilience, qualities that should have been celebrated, were being weaponized to justify abandonment. Meanwhile, Stephanie's sensitivity elevated her needs above mine. "If you really loved your sister," my father added, "you'd understand the importance of her development at this critical juncture." And there it was. The ultimate manipulation. My love for Stephanie was being used against me, transformed into an obligation to accept my own displacement without complaint. I stood up, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "How long do I have?" "We thought a week would be sufficient," my father replied, consulting his notes as if confirming a business detail. "We can help you look for roommate situations, of course." I left without another word, locked myself in my bedroom, and systematically researched affordable housing options until sunrise. The tears would come later. In that moment, survival planning took precedence. Later that night, Stephanie knocked softly on my door. When I let her in, she broke down crying. "I told them it wasn't fair," she sobbed. I said I'd give up the summer programs, that I'd work too, but they said I'd be throwing away my future. They said they'd already decided. I believed she felt genuine remorse. What I couldn't overlook was that her discomfort hadn't translated into meaningful action. She hadn't threatened to refuse their gifts if I was cast out. She hadn't offered to share her college fund. Her tears acknowledged the injustice without challenging it. "It's not your fault," I told her, a partial truth that seemed kinder than a complete one. "This is their decision. What will you do?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "Survive," I answered simply. And remember, 7 days later, I moved out of the only home I'd ever known, taking with me just what would fit in my used Honda Civic. No one cried at this departing. We had mutually agreed to frame it as a natural transition rather than the abandonment it was. My parents gave me a $200 gift card to Target as a starting out present. Stephanie hugged me tightly and slipped me an envelope containing $83, all the money she had saved. As I drove away, the reality I'd been suppressing hit with full force. I had been sacrificed on the altar of my sister's potential. The question that would haunt me for years was simple but devastating. How could parents who claimed to love me calculate my worth and find it insufficient? The apartment I found was a far cry from the comfortable suburban home I'd left behind. Located in the oldest part of town, it was a 2-bedroom unit shared with 3 other girls, all students trying to make ends meet. My bedroom was a converted dining area separated from the living room by a second-hand folding screen. Privacy became a distant memory, replaced by the constant ambient noise of multiple lives unfolding in too small a space. My first night there, I sat on my twin mattress on the floor, surrounded by storage bins containing my life's possessions, and allowed myself exactly 1 hour of tears. Then I created a survival spreadsheet. State University's tuition, even with my partial scholarship, was beyond my means. I enrolled at the local community college instead, mapping a transfer path that would eventually lead to a 4-year degree. Between classes, I worked 30 hours weekly at the coffee shop and picked up weekend shifts at a call center. Sleep became a luxury. Proper meals even more so. My diet consisted primarily of ramen noodles supplemented with whatever was on sale at the grocery store. I became an expert at calculating cost per calorie, stretching ingredients across multiple meals, and fighting off scurvy with the occasional splurge on fresh fruit. One particularly tight month, I subsisted almost entirely on peanut butter sandwiches and multivitamins. The physical toll was evident within months. I lost weight, developed perpetual dark circles under my eyes, and caught every virus that circulated through campus. The mental toll was less visible but more profound. Constant anxiety about finances created a background hum of stress that never fully subsided. Every unexpected expense, a car repair, a mandatory textbook, a medical copay, sent me into a panic spiral. Initially, I attempted to maintain contact with my family. Weekly phone calls home became exercises in emotional endurance as my parents inquired about my classes but quickly pivoted to extended updates on Stephanie's achievements. They never asked about my living conditions or financial situation, perhaps from guilt or perhaps from genuine disinterest. 3 months after moving out, my car's transmission failed. The repair estimate of $1,200 exceeded my emergency fund by $800. With no other options, I swallowed my pride and called home. "That's unfortunate timing," my father said after I explained the situation. "We've just committed to Stephanie's winter intensive at Eastman School of Music. The tuition and housing came to nearly $5,000. I'm not asking for the full amount," I clarified. "Just enough to cover the difference after my savings." The silence that followed spoke volumes. "Allison, we've been over this. We simply don't have resources to split between both of you. Stephanie's development required." I hung up. It was the last time I asked them for anything. My next call was to my roommate's brother, who knew basic automotive repair. He couldn't fix the transmission but helped me find a rebuilt one at a salvage yard and installed it for $600, which I paid in 3 installments. The car ran, though it never shifted properly again. I severed contact with my parents after that call. Through mutual friends, I occasionally received updates about the family. Stephanie had indeed secured a full scholarship to Cornell, where she was double majoring in music performance and business. My parents' Facebook page, viewed once during a moment of weakness on a library computer, showed them beaming beside her at orientation, with captions about our brilliant daughter and so proud of our girl, as if they only had one child. The community college library became my sanctuary. Open until midnight on weekdays, it offered quiet, climate control, and free internet, all luxuries compared to our overheated, noisy apartment with its perpetually unreliable Wi-Fi. I stayed until closing most nights, completing assignments and applying for every scholarship and grant I could find. During my second semester, I hit an emotional wall. Exhaustion, isolation, and the accumulated weight of rejection converged into a depressive episode that left me questioning whether the struggle was worthwhile. I missed 3 days of classes and called in sick to work, behaviors I'd never allowed myself before. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if my parents had been right about my limited potential. My roommate Julia found me like this and, rather than offering empty platitudes, sat beside me in silence for nearly an hour. Finally, she spoke. "My dad left when I was 11, she said. Just packed up and decided he preferred his new girlfriend's kids to his own. For years, I tried to figure out what I could have done differently to make him stay." She looked at me directly. "But that's the thing about people who decide you're not worth the investment, Allison. Their calculation isn't about your value, it's about their limitations. The tragedy isn't what you lost. It's what they'll never find out they missed." Something in her words penetrated the fog I'd been living in. I returned to classes the next day and approached my professors about making up the work I'd missed. Most were accommodating, having seen enough struggling students to recognize genuine need versus laziness. One professor in particular, Dr. James Chen, took a special interest in my situation after I completed an extra credit assignment with unexpected thoroughness. He began recommending me for departmental work-study positions that paid better than retail and aligned with my business administration major. Through him, I found my first internship at a local marketing firm. "You have a remarkable capacity for perseverance, Allison," he told me after reviewing my midterm project. "That's rarer and more valuable than natural talent. Talent without resilience falters at the first serious obstacle." I thought of Stephanie, who had never encountered a genuine obstacle thanks to our parents' constant intervention. I wondered what would happen when she finally did. By the end of my second year, I had assembled enough credits, scholarships, and recommendations to transfer to the State University's business program as I'd originally planned. The struggle continued. I still worked multiple jobs and lived with roommates in substandard housing, but the pathway forward had become clearer. Each semester completed, each skill mastered, each professional connection made, became another step away from the girl who had been deemed expendable. Professor Chen's mentorship proved to be the turning point in my academic journey. What began as occasional career advice evolved into regular meetings where we discussed everything from classroom assignments to long-term professional strategy. Unlike my parents, he saw potential in my methodical approach to challenges. "Natural brilliance gets all the attention," he told me during one of our coffee meetings. "But in my 30 years of teaching, I've found it's the determined plodders who ultimately create lasting impact." With his recommendation, I secured a competitive transfer scholarship that covered 2/3 of my tuition at Westridge University. The school wasn't as prestigious as Cornell, where Stephanie was reportedly thriving, but its business program had strong connections to the emerging tech sector I hoped to enter. My first semester at Westridge tested every coping mechanism I developed. The academic rigor exceeded community college by orders of magnitude, and my fellow students came from backgrounds of privilege that made my struggle seem alien to them. While they complained about their parents' interference in their lives, I kept silent about my parents' absence in mine. Professor Chen had warned me about this cultural disconnect. You'll feel like an anthropologist studying a strange tribe, he said. Use that outsider perspective to your advantage. You see things they don't. He was right. Where my classmates often approached group projects as social events, I treated them as professional opportunities. While they networked at parties, I built connections through substantive contributions to class discussions and volunteering for industry events. My approach wasn't flashier, but it was effective. During my junior year, I developed a particular interest in human resources and talent acquisition after taking an organizational behavior course. The professor, Dr. Elaine Harper, noticed my engagement and suggested I apply for a competitive HR internship at TechSphere, a mid-sized software company expanding its operations. They need people who can identify potential that isn't obvious on paper, she explained. Someone who understands that valuable talent doesn't always come in conventional packages. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my childhood being evaluated and found wanting. Now I might be the one doing the evaluating. The internship application process was grueling: 3 rounds of interviews, a case study presentation, and a personality assessment. Each stage filtered out dozens of candidates. By the final round, I competed against students from elite universities with perfect GPAs and impressive extracurriculars. What I offered instead was a narrative of persistence and practical experience managing diverse responsibilities. When the acceptance call came, I was shelving books during my library work-study shift. I stepped into the stacks to take the call, pressing my hand against my mouth to stifle a scream of joy when the HR director offered me the position. It paid actual money enough that I could reduce my side jobs to just weekends and focus more fully on academics. The internship became my first real glimpse into professional success. I absorbed everything: recruitment strategies, onboarding processes, performance evaluation metrics. I stayed late, volunteered for additional projects, and built relationships across departments. You work like someone who can't afford to fail, observed my supervisor during my mid-internship review. That's not a criticism. It's remarkably rare. She didn't know how literally true her observation was. I couldn't afford to fail because there was no safety net awaiting me, no parents to move back in with, no family connections to leverage for opportunities. Each achievement wasn't just professional advancement, it was survival. Despite the pressure, I thrived. My evaluations were consistently excellent, and the company extended my internship beyond the standard 12 weeks. By graduation, they offered me a full-time position as an HR coordinator with a salary that seemed astronomical compared to my years of minimum wage work. For the first time, I could afford a decent apartment without roommates. It was small, a studio with barely enough room for a bed and desk, but it was mine alone. The night I moved in, I sat on the floor surrounded by my few possessions and wept. Not from sadness or even relief, but from the profound realization that I had created this stability entirely on my own. My career progressed with the same determined momentum that had characterized my education. I consistently volunteered for challenging projects, developed expertise in technical recruitment, and built a reputation for identifying non-traditional candidates who became valuable team members. After 2 years at TechSphere, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from a recruiter at TechVision Industries, one of the most prestigious companies in the field. "Your approach to talent acquisition has been noticed," the message read. "We're looking for someone who sees beyond the obvious credentials." The interview process was even more intensive than my internship application had been, culminating in a panel interview with senior leadership. When asked about my philosophy on evaluating potential, I drew from personal experience without revealing its source. Conventional markers of success: elite education, linear career progression, visible achievements often reflect opportunity more than ability, I explained. I look for evidence of adaptability, resilience, and consistent growth, particularly under challenging circumstances. Those qualities predict long-term success better than any degree or credential. The job offer came with a compensation package that would have seemed impossible 5 years earlier: a six-figure salary, comprehensive benefits, stock options, relocation assistance. More meaningful than the money was the title: Senior Talent Acquisition Manager. At 25, I would be responsible for building teams that would shape the company's future. As I signed the acceptance documents, I thought of my father's words from that birthday meeting. The resources we have must be invested where they'll yield the greatest return. I wondered if he would consider his investment decision vindicated or refuted by my success without his support. I chose not to find out. The promotion announcement I drafted for LinkedIn specifically omitted my last name, using only my first and middle names professionally. It wasn't shame that drove this decision but self-protection. I'd built this life without them. They hadn't earned the right to claim any part of it, even by association. The corner office at Tech Vision Industries offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a visual reminder of how far I'd come from that shared apartment with its makeshift bedroom divider. As Senior Talent Acquisition Manager, I now led a team of recruiters, developed hiring strategies for emerging departments, and reported directly to the Chief Human Resources Officer. My professional reputation had become my most valuable asset. I was known for spotting diamonds in the rough: candidates whose resumes might not scream elite but whose practical skills and adaptability made them exceptional contributors. Several executives had been my discoveries, people who hadn't followed traditional paths but brought fresh perspectives to the company. Allison has an uncanny ability to see what people are capable of, not just what they've already done, my boss said during my 2-year review, authorizing another substantial raise and expanded responsibilities. The irony of becoming an expert in evaluating human potential wasn't lost on me. Every day, I made judgments about candidates' capabilities and fit the very kind of assessment that had once deemed me unworthy of investment. Outwardly, I embodied success. I dressed in carefully selected business attire, lived in an upscale apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and maintained the polished demeanor expected of a rising corporate star. I had achieved financial security beyond what most people my age could imagine. By conventional metrics, I had not merely survived but triumphed. Yet in quiet moments, sitting alone in my immaculate apartment, I confronted a persistent emptiness. Professional achievements, however significant, couldn't fill the void left by family rejection. Each promotion, each recognition, triggered the same hollow question: would it have been enough to make them keep me? Dating proved particularly challenging. My trust issues manifested in a pattern of premature relationship sabotage. I ended connections the moment they deepened, convinced that vulnerability would inevitably lead to abandonment. 3 months seemed to be my limit. By then, partners would begin to notice the walls I'd constructed. "You're incredibly present when we discuss ideas or plans," said Michael, the software engineer I'd dated longest, during our eventual breakup conversation. "But you disappear completely whenever the topic turns personal. It's like watching someone pull a security shutter down." At my therapist's suggestion, I'd begun seeing Dr. Patel 6 months after starting at Tech Vision. The corporate health insurance made it possible for the first time. Initially, I approached therapy like a professional development exercise, identifying inefficiencies in my emotional responses and implementing strategic improvements. Dr. Patel gently but persistently challenged this mechanical approach. "Healing isn't a performance review, Allison," she noted during one session. "There's no efficiency metric for processing grief." And it was grief, she helped me recognize, that dominated my emotional landscape: grief for the family support I'd never had, grief for the sister relationship severed by circumstance, grief for the version of myself that might have developed in a nurturing environment. The nightmares came intermittently but followed a consistent pattern. In them, I was back in my childhood home, preparing for an important presentation or performance. My parents sat in the audience, expressionless, clipboards in hand. No matter how flawlessly I performed, they would simply write insufficient on their evaluation forms and walk away. I'd wake gasping, heart racing, the feeling of inadequacy following me into waking hours. Dr. Patel suggested I write letters to my family not to send, but to articulate the feelings I'd suppressed in my drive to survive. You've been so focused on proving them wrong that you haven't allowed yourself to process how deeply they hurt you, she explained. The letters, once started, poured out of me in torrents of anger, confusion, and lingering grief. To my father, you taught me that love is conditional, that family is just another investment opportunity, that a daughter's worth can be calculated and found wanting. To my mother, you watched me pack my life into a car and drive away at 18, and you never once called to make sure I was safe. To Stephanie, you accepted your role as the chosen one without questioning the sacrifice it required. The most revealing letter, however, was the one I wrote to myself. Part of you still believes they were right about you. Every achievement, every promotion feels like borrowed time before everyone discovers what your parents saw, that you're ordinary, unexceptional, unworthy of investment. Dr. Patel called this my core wound, the belief that if my own parents couldn't find me worthy of support, perhaps no one should. We worked systematically to challenge this belief, to recognize it as their limitation rather than my truth. Progress came in increments rather than breakthroughs. Colleagues and friends often expressed curiosity about my family, especially as holidays approached and everyone discussed travel plans. I developed a collection of vague responses. We're not close. I'm more of a chosen family person. It's complicated. Most people recognized the deflection and didn't push further. The most difficult moments came unexpectedly walking past a mother and daughter shopping together, overhearing colleagues discuss calling their parents for advice, watching families in restaurants enjoying ordinary meals with extraordinary ease. In those moments, the careful compartmentalization I'd constructed would briefly fracture, allowing grief to seep through. Despite therapy and professional success, I maintained my policy of no contact with my family. Through social media algorithms that occasionally suggested people you may know, I gathered fragments of information. My parents had downsized to a smaller home. My father had taken early retirement. Stephanie had graduated from Cornell with honors and accepted a position with a prestigious consulting firm in Chicago. These digital glimpses provided context without connection, information without intimacy. They were like looking at strangers who happened to share my features and history. I never searched for them directly, never reached out, never responded to the 2 birthday messages my mother had sent during my first year away before apparently accepting my silence. "Aren't you curious about them?" a close colleague asked after I'd shared a sanitized version of my family situation during a rare vulnerable moment. "Curiosity implies emotional distance," I replied. "What I feel is more complicated than that." The truth was both simpler and more complex. I had built an identity, a career, and a life defined by independence. Reintroducing my family into that carefully constructed reality threatened its foundations. More importantly, I had no evidence that anything had fundamentally changed, that they now valued me for myself rather than for what I could provide or achieve. So I maintained my separate peace, excelling professionally while navigating personal relationships with cautious distance. I developed deep friendships with a select few who respected my boundaries without requiring extensive explanations. I cultivated interests: hiking, classical music, international cinema that filled my free time with meaningful engagement. I contributed to mentorship programs for first-generation college students, finding purpose in supporting others navigating systems without family guidance. By my 27th birthday, I had achieved a life that looked successful by any conventional standard. What remained unclear, even to me, was whether that success had healed the wound at its core, or simply built an impressive structure around it. That question would find its unexpected answer through the most ordinary of professional tasks: reviewing resumes for an open senior analyst position at TechVision Industries. Tuesday mornings at TechVision typically began with resume review sessions, during which I evaluated candidates for key positions across the company. This particular Tuesday seemed unremarkable: 15 applications for a senior data analyst role, most with the predictable credentials and experiences one would expect. I was halfway through the stack when I saw it. Stephanie Morris, Stanford MBA, Cornell undergraduate, double major in music performance and business administration, 5 years experience at Meridian Consulting, specializing in data analytics for creative industries. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I read the name again, examining the professional headshot included in the application. The face was more mature, the hairstyle different, but unmistakably my sister. The resume was impressive. Stephanie had indeed fulfilled the potential my parents had sacrificed me to nurture. She had the pedigree, the prestigious experience, and the specialized expertise that aligned perfectly with our needs. My first impulse was to recuse myself immediately. I could easily pass the application to another manager, citing a vague previous connection that might constitute a conflict of interest. No one would question it. No one would ever know. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was professional curiosity about how the golden child had developed. Perhaps it was the dark satisfaction of now being in the position of judgment. Or perhaps, though I barely admitted it even to myself, it was the simple human desire to see a face from the past, however complicated that past might be. After 20 minutes of internal debate, I made my decision. I would conduct the initial interview myself. I would evaluate Stephanie Morris with the same objective criteria I applied to every candidate. I would be professional, detached, and fair. And I would see firsthand what became of the sister whose future had been deemed more valuable than my present. I scheduled the interview for Thursday afternoon, carefully selecting a time slot that would allow me to prepare properly beforehand and decompress afterward. No back-to-back meetings, no additional pressure. I informed my assistant only that this candidate required my personal attention due to her specialized background. The intervening days passed with excruciating slowness. I reviewed Stephanie's application materials repeatedly, noting accomplishments, identifying questions, preparing exactly as I would for any high-priority candidate. Beneath this professional preparation, emotions churned. Dr. Patel's voice echoed in my mind. Unexpected encounters with our past often trigger our most deeply ingrained responses. Be conscious of these reactions. They belong to an earlier version of yourself. Thursday morning, I found myself standing before my closet for an unusually long time, deliberating over my appearance with an intensity normally reserved for board presentations. I finally selected a charcoal gray suit, professional, authoritative, understated. No flashy jewelry, no designer labels, nothing that screamed, "Look how well I've done without you." At 2:58 p.m., my assistant messaged me, "Miss Morris has arrived for her 3 p.m. interview." I took a deep breath, straightened the already perfect stack of papers on my desk, and responded, "Please send her in." The door opened, and there she stood. Stephanie had matured into a poised professional woman, dressed in a navy suit with subtle gold accessories. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, styled in a sleek bob that framed her face elegantly. For a brief moment, as she entered with confident steps and a practiced smile, I don't think she fully registered who sat behind the desk. "Good afternoon, I'm Stephanie Morris. Thank you for..." The words died abruptly as recognition dawned. Her practiced smile faltered, her professional demeanor cracking visibly. "Allison?" The name hung in the air between us, both question and confirmation. 5 years of silence collapsed into a single stunned syllable. "Hello, Stephanie," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Please, have a seat." She moved to the chair across from my desk with mechanical steps, never taking her eyes from my face, as though I might disappear if she looked away. The professional mask she'd worn upon entering had completely dissolved, replaced by naked shock. "I I had no idea you worked here. She managed finally. Your profile just listed A. J. Walker as the interviewer. I never Fokker. I use my middle name professionally, I explained. The practiced neutrality of my tone a stark contrast to the emotional chaos visible on her face. Walker was our grandmother's maiden name. You changed your name? The question contained multitudes, surprise, perhaps hurt, and the dawning realization of how completely I had separated myself from our shared past. I created my own identity, I corrected gently. It seemed appropriate, given the circumstances. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me, the city sprawled in afternoon sunlight, oblivious to our private drama unfolding on the 28th floor. Finally, I gestured to her resume on my desk. You've built an impressive career, Stephanie. Meridian Consulting is highly regarded in the industry. Her laugh held no humor. Are we really going to do this? Pretend this is a normal interview after 5 years of nothing? I met her gaze directly. I'm conducting this interview because you're qualified for the position, and evaluating qualified candidates is my job. Our personal history doesn't change your professional credentials or my professional responsibilities. Our personal history, she repeated, the phrase obviously inadequate for the complex reality it attempted to contain. Is that what we're calling it now? I recognized the anger simmering beneath her words, the same anger I'd carried for years before learning to transform it into determination. For a moment, I considered ending the charade, acknowledging the elephant in the room, perhaps even suggesting we reschedule with another interviewer. Instead, I made a different choice. We have 45 minutes scheduled for this interview, Stephanie. We can use that time to discuss your qualifications for the senior analyst position, or we can use it to begin a very different conversation. I'll leave that choice to you. She stared at me, searching my face for something: permission, perhaps, or forgiveness, or simply recognition. Whatever she sought, she seemed to find enough of it to make her decision. I'd like to be considered for the position, she said finally, straightening in her chair. On my own merits, I nodded, relieved and oddly disappointed simultaneously. Then let's begin with your experience at Meridian. Your resume mentions you led the digital transformation project for Blue Sky Entertainment. The professional facade gradually reassembled itself as we moved through standard interview questions. Stephanie responded with articulate explanations of her projects, achievements, and approaches to analytical challenges. On paper and in person, she was indeed exceptionally qualified, brilliant, thoughtful, with precisely the background our department needed. Yet beneath this professional exchange, currents of unspoken questions electrified the air between us. Every pause contained potential revelations. Every follow-up question carried double meanings. We performed this strange dance of professional evaluation layered over personal history, neither fully acknowledging nor completely ignoring the complexity of our situation. As the scheduled time drew to a close, I asked the question I posed to every candidate: what would you consider your greatest professional challenge, and how did you overcome it? Stephanie's composure, maintained so carefully throughout our exchange, finally faltered. My greatest professional challenge, she repeated slowly, has been learning to measure success by my own standards rather than external expectations. Our eyes met, and for a moment, all pretense fell away. I grew up with tremendous pressure to justify other people's sacrifices, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. It took years to realize that no achievement would ever be enough to balance that scale. The professional boundary I'd maintained throughout the interview wavered. This was no longer candidate Stephanie Morris responding to a standard question. This was my sister speaking a truth that resonated with my own experience. Before I could formulate a response that honored both my professional role and our shared history, my assistant knocked lightly, opening the door just enough to remind us that our time had concluded. The next candidate was waiting. "Thank you for your time, Miss Morris," I said, standing and extending my hand across the desk. "We'll be in touch regarding next steps in the process." She took my hand, the formal handshake transforming midway into a grip that conveyed everything we hadn't said. "Thank you for the opportunity," she replied, our joined hands communicating more than our careful words. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Allison," she said without turning back, "I looked for you. For years. You're very hard to find when you don't want to be found." Then she was gone, leaving me alone with a perfectly completed interview assessment form and a hurricane of emotions I'd spent 5 years carefully containing. The rest of my afternoon proceeded with mechanical precision. I conducted 2 more interviews, attended a budget meeting, and responded to urgent emails, all while my mind repeatedly circled back to those 30 minutes with Stephanie. By 6 o'clock, when the office had emptied of all but the most dedicated workers, I finally allowed myself to fully process what had happened. Stephanie's qualifications were undeniable. Based purely on merit, she should advance to the next round of interviews. Denying her that opportunity because of our personal history would violate every professional principle I valued. Yet the prospect of continued interaction, of peeling back layers of separation I'd carefully constructed, filled me with apprehension. I was still contemplating this dilemma when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Can we talk? Properly, I mean. There's a cafe on the corner of 5th and Pine. I'll be there until 8 if you want to join me. Stephanie." She must have gotten my number from the company contact information provided to interviewees. The message sat on my screen, simultaneously an invitation and a challenge. For 5 years, I had controlled the boundaries of my life with meticulous care. Accepting this invitation meant voluntarily breaching those boundaries. After 20 minutes of internal debate, I texted back a single word: "Okay." The cafe was a small, independent establishment with subdued lighting and reasonably private seating areas. I spotted Stephanie immediately, seated in a corner booth, her interview attire exchanged for jeans and a simple blouse. 2 coffee cups sat on the table, one in front of her, the other across from her. She'd been confident I would come. "I ordered you a latte," she said as I approached. "You still take it with an extra shot and no sugar, right?" The fact that she remembered this detail from our shared past, that she had preserved such ordinary knowledge through years of separation, unexpectedly touched me. "Yes, thank you." I slid into the booth across from her, the professional distance of the interview room replaced by intimate proximity. Neither of us spoke immediately, both seemingly aware that whatever came next would irreversibly alter the careful separation we had maintained. "You look good, Allison," she finally offered. "Successful. So do you," I replied, meaning it. Whatever else had transpired between us, she had grown into a composed, accomplished adult. "Stanford MBA is impressive." A familiar shadow crossed her face, the same expression I'd seen countless times in our youth when our parents praised her achievements. "It's what was expected." "Was it what you wanted?" The question emerged before I could filter it through my usual careful restraint. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "I don't think anyone ever asked me that before." The simple statement contained volumes. I recognized in it my own experience of being defined by others' expectations, though from the opposite direction, she crushed by overwhelming faith in her potential, me dismissed for supposedly lacking it. "I'm asking now," I said. She considered this for a moment. "Parts of it, yes. I love analytics, the puzzle-solving aspect of extracting meaning from chaos. But the pressure to be exceptional in everything." She shook her head. "It's exhausting trying to justify sacrifices you never asked for." The acknowledgement hung between us, the first direct reference to the circumstances of our separation. I took a sip of my latte, buying time to decide how much of myself I was willing to reveal. "What happened after I left?" I finally asked, opening the door to the past we'd danced around during the interview. Stephanie's expression turned pained. "Exactly what they planned. I went to Cornell on full scholarship. Mom and Dad converted your bedroom into a study space for me within a week. They talked about you like you'd gone on some grand adventure of independence, never acknowledging they'd forced it on you. And you?" I kept my tone neutral. though the image of my room being erased so quickly sent a sharp pain through me. I was. She paused, searching for the right word. Complicit. I knew what they'd done was wrong. I told myself I'd make it up to you after college. Once I had my own resources, I convinced myself their decision was terrible but temporary. She looked directly at me now, her eyes glistening. I tried to find you after freshman year, called your old phone number, which was disconnected, reached out to mutual friends who said you'd cut contact with anyone connected to the family. Even hired a basic internet search service, but you'd become Jay Walker by then. I'd been thorough in my separation, intentionally leaving no breadcrumbs that might lead back to me. I needed a clean break, I explained, offering neither apology nor accusation. I understand that now, she said quietly. Back then, I thought you'd abandoned me too. The statement caught me off guard. I wasn't the one who did the abandoning, Stephanie, weren't you? A flash of her own suppressed anger surfaced. You disappeared completely. No forwarding address, no occasional texts to check if I was okay. Nothing. I was 17, still living under their control. Watching what they'd done to you and knowing I was the reason. I hadn't considered this perspective that my self-protective severance had left her alone with the architects of our separation, bearing not only the weight of their expectations but also the guilt of my displacement. What would you have had me do? I asked. Stay connected while they continued treating me as disposable? I don't know, she admitted. Something between total presence and complete absence, maybe. Some acknowledgement that we were siblings regardless of what they decided. Her words struck a nerve. In protecting myself from further pain, had I abandoned the only other person who understood the dysfunctional dynamic that had shaped us both? That's fair, I conceded. I was focused on survival. So was I, just differently. She set down her cup with deliberate care. They expected perfection after investing everything in me. Do you know what it's like trying to justify someone else's sacrifice that you never asked for? The crushing guilt when you get a B+ or have a bad audition? I shook my head. Our experiences had been mirror images, she drowning in expectation while I starved for recognition. After graduation, they started talking about returns on investment. Her voice took on a bitter edge. Literal returns, Allison. They'd depleted their retirement accounts for my education and expected me to support them financially. My first job offer wasn't good enough. My apartment was too expensive. Money that should be going to them. My student loan payments were taking precedence over their needs. I felt a chill. They're still doing this? She nodded. Until last year. I finally set boundaries after they suggested I decline a promotion because the added responsibilities might reduce the money I could send them. That's when I realized nothing would ever be enough. The pattern was so clear from outside. Our parents hadn't valued either of us for ourselves but for what we could provide. They'd discarded me for insufficient potential return and were now attempting to collect dividends on their investment in Stephanie. That's why you're looking for a new position, I realized. You're creating distance. 3,000 miles of it, she confirmed. I need to find out who I am when I'm not performing for an audience of 2. The irony was striking her, seeking the very independence they'd forced upon me. Different paths leading to the same destination. The need to define ourselves beyond their narrow evaluation. For what it's worth, I said carefully, the position you interviewed for is based entirely on your qualifications. Your background in data analytics for creative industries is exactly what we're looking for. I appreciate that, she replied. Though I imagine having my sister as my boss would create its own complications. I'd recuse myself from direct supervision, I assured her, then paused, realizing I'd implicitly confirmed she would advance in the process. Assuming you're still interested in the position, I am, she said, then hesitated. But more than that, I'm interested in knowing my sister again. If that's something you might want too. The question carried no pressure, only genuine uncertainty. 5 years ago, I couldn't have contemplated reopening this door. The pain had been too raw, the survival instinct too strong. But now, sitting across from Stephanie, seeing her not as the golden child who had benefited from my exile, but as another victim of our parents' warped values. I found myself considering possibilities I'd long since dismissed. I don't know what that would look like, I admitted. We can't exactly pick up where we left off. No, she agreed. But maybe we could start somewhere new. No expectations, no history determining who we should be to each other. Just two adults figuring it out step by step. Her proposal offered what neither of us had ever truly experienced: a relationship based on choice rather than obligation, developing according to our own needs rather than external demands. I think I'd like to try, I said finally, surprising myself with how much I meant it. The smile that spread across her face contained equal measures of relief and hope. So would I. As we continued talking, the professional veneer that had characterized our earlier interview dissolved completely. We shared abbreviated versions of our journeys since that fateful 18th birthday, the challenges we'd faced, the lessons we'd learned, the people who had supported us along the way. With each exchange, the 5-year gap between us narrowed, not quite closing but becoming less of an impassable chasm. By the time we finally left the cafe, nearly 3 hours had passed. We stood on the sidewalk, the evening air cool against my skin, both recognizing that whatever came next would be uncharted territory. About Mom and Dad, Stephanie began hesitantly. They've been asking about you more frequently lately. I think age is making them reconsider some decisions. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest at the mention of our parents. I'm not ready for that, I said honestly. Maybe someday, but not yet. She nodded. I understand. I'll respect whatever boundaries you need. As we prepared to part ways, Stephanie reached out tentatively. I stepped forward, and we embraced for the first time in 5 years, a careful hug that acknowledged both our shared past and the uncertain future we might build. Thank you for meeting me, she whispered. For giving me a chance to explain. Thank you for looking for me, I replied, finally acknowledging the significance of her persistence. Even when I made it nearly impossible, we separated, each heading toward our respective cars, but before we completely parted, I called after her. Stephanie? The interview panel meets tomorrow at 9. I'll make sure your application receives fair consideration, regardless of our personal connection. Her smile contained a hint of our old sisterly understanding. I'd expect nothing less from the senior talent acquisition manager. As I drove home through the city's evening traffic, I realized that the emptiness I'd carried for years had shifted somehow. Not disappeared. The wounds of family rejection wouldn't heal overnight, but transformed into something more complex. The possibility of reconciliation with Stephanie offered a middle path between complete severance and unconditional reunion. For the first time since leaving home, I allowed myself to consider that family might be something I could define on my own terms, not a fixed hierarchy of worth determined by others, but a flexible bond, based on mutual respect and genuine care. The thought was simultaneously frightening and freeing, much like the path that had brought me to this unexpected crossroads. The following week passed in a professional blur. The interview panel advanced Stephanie to the final round, based solely on her qualifications. I recused myself from that stage of the process, explaining to my director that I had a personal connection to the candidate that might constitute a conflict of interest. She was ultimately offered the position and accepted, scheduled to begin in 3 weeks after relocating from Chicago. We met again the Sunday before her first day, this time at a small park overlooking the bay. The formal attire of our previous encounters gave way to casual weekend clothes, jeans, light sweaters, comfortable shoes. Without the context of interviews or emotion-charged cafe confessionals, we found ourselves navigating a new, more ordinary form of interaction. I found an apartment not far from here, Stephanie said as we walked along the shoreline path. It's small but has amazing light for my houseplants. I didn't know you were into plants, I remarked, realizing how many aspects of her adult identity remained unknown to me. She smiled. Started during the pandemic. My Chicago apartment looked like a jungle by the end of it, Had to give half of them away before moving here. These simple exchanges, learning preferences, habits, interests developed during our years apart felt like building blocks, small but essential elements in constructing a new relationship unbound by our shared history. Eventually, we settled on a bench overlooking the water, the conversation turning inevitably to the past that continued to shape our present, despite our best efforts to move beyond it. "I've been thinking about that day," Stephanie said, both of us knowing exactly which day she meant. "About what I could have done differently." "We were both caught in a situation not of our making," I replied, the perspective of years softening some of the sharper edges of that memory. "You were 17, still dependent on them." "I could have refused their support," she insisted. "Threatened to leave too if they didn't reconsider." I shook my head. "And then what? Both of us struggling instead of just one. What would that have accomplished?" "Maybe nothing practical," she admitted. "But it would have shown you weren't alone. That someone was willing to sacrifice for you, the way you were forced to sacrifice for me." The thought carried a certain poetic justice. But the reality would have been far more complicated. "I wouldn't have wanted that burden either," I told her. "The problem wasn't that they chose you. It was that they believed they had to choose at all, that love and support were finite resources to be allocated based on projected returns." She considered this. "Do you think they ever loved us for ourselves, not for what we could become or provide?" It was the question that had haunted me through years of therapy and late-night reflections. "I think they loved their idea of us," I said finally. "Which isn't the same as loving the actual people we are. That's why I've kept my distance this past year," Stephanie explained. "Every conversation circles back to how my choices impact their financial security, how my career moves might benefit them. It's exhausting." "Have they asked you for money directly?" The thought of our parents attempting to collect on their investment filled me with a protective anger I hadn't anticipated feeling. "Monthly contributions," she confirmed, "which gradually increased regardless of my actual ability to provide." When I mentioned cutting back to save for a down payment on a condo, Dad actually said, "We didn't invest in your education so you could prioritize your wants over our needs." The familiar phrasing sent a chill through me. That sounds exactly like what he told me when they asked me to leave. "I know," she said quietly. That's when I realized nothing had changed. They were using the same script on me that they had used on you, just with different expectations. My value to them was still conditional on what I could provide. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this shared understanding settling between us. Our parents' conditional love had shaped us both, me through explicit rejection, Stephanie through the crushing pressure of being the worthy investment. "Do you think you'll ever want to see them again?" Stephanie asked, careful to phrase it as a question rather than an expectation. I considered this honestly. "I don't know. The person I am now exists because I was forced to build myself without them. There's a certain completion in that. Reopening that chapter might undermine what I've worked so hard to create." "I understand," she said, and I believed she did. "For what it's worth, I think they've realized what they lost. They ask about you more frequently now, especially since I've established firmer boundaries." "That sounds more like regret than growth," I observed, missing what might have benefited them rather than recognizing the harm they caused. She nodded. "Probably. I don't think they're capable of the kind of self-reflection that would lead to genuine change." "Which means any reunion would likely reinforce old patterns rather than establish new ones," I concluded. "Likely," she agreed. "Though I'll support whatever you decide, now or in the future." The acknowledgement that my choice was valid, that I could maintain boundaries without justification or apology, offered a freedom I hadn't fully claimed until now. My sister, the person who had once been positioned as the reason for my displacement, was affirming my right to protect myself from further harm. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." We turned to more immediate, practical matters: her orientation schedule, the company culture she'd be entering, recommendations for local services in her new neighborhood. The conversation flowed more naturally now, finding a rhythm that acknowledged our shared past without being dominated by it. As afternoon faded toward evening, Stephanie asked the question that had likely been on her mind throughout our meeting. So, how do we do this? Being sisters again, I mean. Do we start with weekly coffee, monthly dinners, family holidays someday? Or just see what happens naturally? I smiled at her methodical approach, so similar to my own tendency to seek structure amid uncertainty. Maybe we don't need to define it yet, I suggested. We could just be available to each other. Learn who we've become. Let the relationship develop according to what we both need rather than what we think sisters should be to each other. The relief on her face was visible. I'd like that. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility. Exactly, I agreed. We get to define family on our terms now. As we prepared to part ways, Stephanie hesitated. Can I ask you something personal? I nodded. Curious, are you happy, Allison? Not just successful or self-sufficient, but actually happy? The question caught me off guard with its simplicity and depth. I'm getting there, I answered honestly. I've built a life I'm proud of. I have meaningful work, good friends, financial security. The happiness part is still developing. But I think that's true for most people. Even the ones who weren't kicked out at 18? Her attempt at lightness couldn't quite mask the underlying concern. Especially them, I assured her. At least I had the clarity of knowing exactly where I stood and what I needed to build. No illusions, no false security. She considered this. There's a strange freedom in that, isn't there? In having to define everything for yourself. Freedom and terror, I acknowledged. But mostly freedom, in retrospect. We hugged goodbye with less hesitation than before, the physical contact becoming more natural as our new relationship took tentative shape. As we separated, Stephanie held my gaze with unexpected intensity. For what it's worth, Allison, I've always been proud of you. Even when I couldn't tell you, even when I was benefiting from your absence, I knew you were the stronger one. You still are. The words touched something deep within me, not healing the old wound completely, but acknowledging its existence in a way no one else from my past had ever done. We're both stronger than they ever gave us credit for, I replied. Just in different ways. Driving home that evening, I reflected on the strange circular path that had brought us to this point. 5 years ago, I had been deemed the expendable sister, sacrificed for Stephanie's promising future. Now, through chance or fate or simple professional coincidence, I had become the gatekeeper to her new beginning, not to extract revenge or claim superiority, but to offer the support neither of us had properly received from those who should have provided it unconditionally. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it no longer carried the bitter edge it might have even months earlier. Instead, I found myself contemplating the possibility that being kicked out at 18 had not been my tragedy but my liberation, forcing me to build a life defined by my own values rather than their limited assessment of my worth. As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. Thanks for today. Looking forward to whatever comes next. No expectations, just gratitude. I smiled at the simple message, typing back. Same. Welcome to your new beginning. Perhaps that was the true resolution, not erasing the past or pretending the pain had never happened, but recognizing that new beginnings remained possible despite it. My parents had evaluated my potential and found it wanting, but their calculation had proven spectacularly wrong. The daughter they had discarded had built herself into someone capable not only of professional success but also of extending grace where none had been shown to her. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without nightmares of inadequacy or rejection. Whatever came next with Stephanie, with my career, with the ongoing process of healing, I would face it on my own terms, no longer defined by others' limited perception of my worth but by the strength I had found in creating myself anew. If you've ever felt undervalued by the people who should have believed in you most, I hope my story reminds you that sometimes being deemed not enough is the beginning of discovering just how much you're truly capable of. Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship with someone from your past? Did it work out, or did you find it better to maintain your distance? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else navigating their own complicated family dynamics. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation. And hit that notification bell to join our community of survivors who've become thrivers. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, the people who couldn't see your value don't get to define your future. That power belongs to you alone.